Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Week 4 lecture. So as we move through this lecture, we're focusing on the idea of moderation as part of our assessment and then our recording and reporting processes that we have. So our plan is to look at some formal assessment that we would do in our early years, because we've focused the last couple of weeks on our informal things, last week being very focused around observation. We're then going to think about what is moderation and some of the resources provided by SCASA to help us with moderation. Some ideas about record keeping, reporting, and the idea of making sure that we always keep in mind holistic assessment. So when we're thinking about moderation, essentially it's a word that you will hear used quite a bit, particularly when people refer to middle and upper primary and in secondary. But what we know is that for our assessment to be authentic and reliable and valid, it needs to be consistent between and within schools. Because when we're doing our reports, we want to make sure that we are reporting appropriately. So moderation, it's about this idea of ensuring consistency within our assessment and our reporting processes. It's about making good judgments that ensure that what I look at is the same as what my colleague looks at. It's making sure that we have the consistency to say, yes, that is what we expect at this age and development and year level. This is what makes a C when we're doing our reports and so on. So it's about answering that essential question. How do I know my understanding of achieving the standard is the same as my colleagues' pre-primary teachers' understanding of achieving the standard? And we make sure that we're putting the same standards for each school, regardless of their location, socioeconomic status, different teachers, and so on. So how does this work? So what we have is SCASA has developed a series of work samples for us. Now, most of you should have access to this. You would have been asked to create a username and password with the extranet with SCASA. And so these work samples that have been developed, they were originally some of them part of the Australian curriculum when they went through the idea of what does a C look like. So we have this content, and then there is a task, and there are work samples associated with it. So these are some SCASA work samples. So this was the task. So what they needed to do for pre-primary was to connect the number names, numerals, and quantities, including 0, up to 10, and then beyond. So if we have a look at the work sample, you can see that there is a pretty good understanding of lots of things that you would want to see. So they've been able to write the number. They've been able to actually write the number name as well and spell the correct letters in it. It's pretty good. Then they've been able to make the right number of boxes in the left-hand bottom side. And then they've been able to show a number of different ways that they could make the number 10, including beautiful backwards 5s that we have completely developmentally appropriate when we're looking at pre-primaries and year 1s. If we had a year 3 or a year 4 child who was still reversing their 5s and 2s and so on, that would be a bit more of an issue. We'd need to investigate that a bit further. But in a pre-primary or year 1, completely acceptable at that time. So what we wanted them to be able to do was to then annotate over the top and say, right, what have they been able to achieve? So if we look at this work sample, we can see that they are connecting the number names, numerals, and quantities, doing exactly what we wanted them to do. So in orange, it provides some more information. So it says provides different ways to represent the numbers 10 correctly using words and diagrams, draws 10 squares, writes the word 10, and writes the number 10. So we've got all of that elaborated for us, and it writes it in a way that as a teacher, I can look at it and go, okay, that is fantastic. So this is a C level. So maths pre-primary satisfactory achievement. Now, that's what I would expect by the end of pre-primary that most pre-primaries would be able to do. So when I have a look and I might do something in the first half of pre-primary they're not quite there yet because this is expected by the end of pre-primary that they will be able to do that. So then let's look at same task, but now we're looking at one that is excellent achievement. So you may have had a teacher who said, would you like to do a number greater than 10? Or could you do me a number less than 20? And so on. So this child has done the number 16 and exactly the same thing. So when we look at it, we can see that they have clearly written in 16 little dots. They have then given us multiple ways of representing 16, including the breaking down of it into the 6 plus the 10 and so on, and multiple ways of doing it, the reciprocal nature of the 6 plus 10 and the 10 plus 6. Then they've done our 10 plus 3 plus 3 and our 10 plus 5 plus 1. So they're really understanding the idea that 16 is made up of a 10 and some other numbers as well to make 10. So it's got one lot of 10 and 6 lots of ones, and they've broken the 6 lots of ones up into a range of different things. So that would be our high achievement. So then you need to think about what would a standard that is below standard look like. So in our moderation, they will have different samples for us. So they've done samples in English and maths, and now as you start to go through, you'll be able to see work samples in nearly every learning area. And I find some of them have an A, B, C, D, and some of them might just have an A and a C level. But every learning area, every year level, a range of work samples for us to be able to look at. So if we have a look at English, so our pre-primaries, their task was that we wanted them to use familiar words and phrases, to convey ideas, to show evidence of it, and so on. And the task that they were required to do, photos were taken of them carrying out their everyday activities and used as prompts to encourage them to have a go at writing. So they shared with a partner what they were doing in the photographs and then asked to use their sound-letter knowledge to write 1 or 2 sentences that described what was happening in the photograph. So you can see that they have done a little drawing. This is a satisfactory achievement. So they liked the home corner, I like the books, I like the painting, and I like the blocks. So when you have a look at a particular piece of writing like that, I can see that they are writing phonetically. I can see that they have written those nice ideas of short sentences. They've got lots of familiar words in there, and they're representing their initial and their key sounds, and they're writing from left to right, top to bottom. So all of those essential elements definitely included. So they're able to write short text to record familiar ideas and so on. So this is an expected satisfactory achievement standard by the end of pre-primary. So if I was in term 1 of pre-primary, I probably wouldn't have many children who would be able to do this. But by the end of pre-primary, I would have lots of children who would be able to do this. If I was at a school that had lots of average students, if I was in a school that had lots of vulnerable children who were having difficulties connecting with learning and so on, I might only have that from very few students. But it doesn't mean they get an A. It means that moderation shows me that they are satisfactory achievement for the expected standard at pre-primary at that point in time. If I had a whole lot of students who were performing much below that, then yes, they would be sitting at a D or potentially an E. And it does become really tricky because you might have a child who's doing really well in your class and the rest of the children are not doing well. But if that child was put into somebody else's class, they might only just be okay, and vice versa. I might be in a really, really fabulous high socioeconomic school that has really high performing students, and I don't mark them down. I don't mark them all at a C and only give 5 of them an A. If they're all able to achieve excellent achievement, then that's what they get. So it's important that we use this idea of moderation to make sure that we are consistent, particularly when it comes time to report writing. That's when I find that we're using our moderation processes the most. And that's when we should be using them, because we shouldn't have standards that differ between different schools. If you have common expectations, it will mean that when a child moves from school to school or from year level to year level, it makes sense for the parents and for other people in the school. So when we're thinking about how we create this documentation, we need to really consider what are we doing and why are we doing it. So we need to think with our documentation for assessment, who's going to see it, and not just who's going to see it immediately, but who may want to see it later on. What's the purpose for our documentation? How do we keep the records? Physical keep the records, or digital, or combination of the two? What do we need to include and what do we not want to include? And that could be things like we need to make sure whatever records that we keep are very objective. We don't want to include emotions in them. We want to make sure that they are a description of what the child is able to do or not able to do. And we want to make sure that it is very objective and not containing subjective comments of any sort. We want to also provide an analysis, particularly last week when we looked at the observations. Observations often will require an analysis of why are we observing that? What did we notice? What else goes with those observations? And then our writing style that we're going to use when we are documenting anything is we need to make sure that it is in a formal style that actually matches to those ideas of who will see it, what is the purpose, and how we're going to keep those records. So when we're organising our assessment, we have to think about how many items are we going to be collecting and how will we ensure that we can access them appropriately at a later point in time. So you're going to have folders, you're going to have files, you're going to have, those expanding files where you're dropping everything in for every child and so on. Some people use plastic sleeve books and have something for every child and so on. You will have now, as you start to use a lot more of them, there'll be lots of digital work samples. Fantastic, because a lot of them will be automatically date stamped. You might have lots of seesaw activities, and again, they'll be date stamped, so you've got ideas of how the children have gone all the way through the year level. You'll have things like your post-it notes. What are you going to do with them? It really is an endless list of different things that you could potentially use in a classroom. But you need to think about how are you going to stay on top of it all? What are you going to do as a teacher to not drown in paper or to not feel that you haven't got a handle on all of your assessment? So think about how and why you organise it. I've worked with teachers who have used OneNote and they create an assessment OneNote, and in that assessment OneNote they have sections for every child, they have sections for every learning area, they put all the pictures of their checklists in, they add in annotated work samples at different points in time, they then link to seesaw activities to provide justification, they write little things, and then when it comes time to meet with a parent, they've got all of the information at their fingertips. I have other people who use amazing Excel spreadsheets and everything is recorded in it. They use codes, they can bring different sets of data together and so on. So you're probably going to have a combination of digital and paper-based resources. So you need to work out a way to do both. Some people find it easy to convert all of their paper-based ones into digital ones as things are going through, and that way then they just send the work home with the children and they've got a digital copy of it for when they want to refer to it later on. But you need to think about how are you going to keep on top of it all. Now, when we're at uni, we require you to do a little bit more work in this area than what some teachers do from an external point of view. So you might create a background profile of each child that you have in your class. And I used to create these through a little form that I would send home to the parents, and it would come back and I would have all of the information for them. I've also done this as a digital little survey that I've sent home, and then I can just print it all out and I have all of the information that I need. Oftentimes the school will have this information anyway, so you can compile it all for each child. You may find it easy to gather it for yourself as well, so you might find out what you can from the office, but then you might want to get the latest up-to-date information sometimes, because sometimes we don't have all of it. So then at uni, you'll then want to have something like this that can be your individual assessment as an observation of some sort. So remember, we looked at that last week when we were observing the children. So putting in the date and the time, what we were observing as our focus area, what we actually observed, and then the analysis and interpretation of that observation. Because remember that a straight observation without a context doesn't mean anything to anyone potentially other than you. So how do you make that come to life and be useful for you? So then thinking about adding into your individual learner profile, putting in what are their areas of strengths, what are the areas that require assistance, and having it at a particular point in time. How are you planning for their extension, and how are you planning for scaffolding in some way for supporting their learning in different forms? So thinking about how are you going to actually bring all of that together in some way. Thinking with your dated observations, this might be where you would look at a group and you might go, okay, I'm really going to focus on my transitions. I'm going to focus on how they're paying attention at different things. And so then you think, okay, how are my math sessions going? What am I doing? What am I observing? What have I noticed? And what am I going to do next with it? Thinking about then your transitions between your mat time to outside time, or mat time to activity time, and so on. What is that going to look like? How your learning centres work. Are there particular learning centres that are causing a fuss for you and the children? Do you need to reconsider your processes and how they go about accessing the learning centres, how they're sharing them, and so on? And what does your outdoor time look like? So all of those examples are possible things that you could use. They're things that we have as available items for you, but they're things that you can choose and go, okay, well, this will really work for me. This won't. I need to think about this from this point of view, and so on. So think what's going to work for you and your circumstances. Now, let's move on to reporting. So when we think about reporting, every year from pre-primary onwards must report twice a year in suitable language in a 5-point scale to the parents. It's not an option. We just have to do it. It's part of our government regulations. So when we are looking at reporting, some of those decisions there will be taken away from you and they will be enforced by the school or the system. So it used to be that pre-primaries could make a choice as to how they wanted to report. I'm finding now that most of the systems have said pre-primaries must have a formal report every 6 months. So at the end of term 2 and the end of term 4. Kindies, I'm seeing lots of kindies that are moving that same way as well, which breaks my heart. But it's something that schools feel they need to do. The systems have not said that kindies need to formally report. So if you can, try and keep to informal reports. But know that that choice may be taken away. When you're thinking about informal reporting, think about things like your floor books that we've talked about, how you display your work in the classroom, having a book that might go backwards and forwards between home and school, and so on. So all of those are versions of informal reporting. Your formal reporting is your official reports combined with things that might be parent interviews. You might also have a portfolio. And the other thing that you might see is learning journeys where the parents come in for an evening or afternoon, and so on. So with your reports, decide how you will report if you have a choice, and when you are getting ready for reports, I really find that knowing what needs to go in the report and work backwards to make sure that you are prepared for every part that you need to be able to report on. So therefore, create your plan and go, okay, I know I've got these things that I need to report on. So therefore, in the 8 weeks leading up to the reports being due in term 2, I've got to make sure that every week or two I'm doing something that will give me some more information for those reports in some way. So I create a plan so that I'm not getting to my report time and going, oh my goodness, I don't have enough data. No, you won't have enough data. So think about how are you going to make sure that you are creating good, authentic data and building it in to your general activities so that you can make sure you are creating a nice, easy progress action plan that will ensure when it comes time to write reports, you've got everything sitting in your OneNote. You've got it all in your Seesaw. You've got it all as a set of checklists. Some way that will fine tune it for you. Reporting can't be avoided. You have to think about how you're going to do it. So make sure that you have your plan because then it will just make life so much easier. So different ways that we report. You've got your formal reports that we've said. You've got your parent interviews. Lots of schools run parent interviews, say in terms 1 and term 3 in the other terms. I used to love to have a report at the end of term 1, so that way I could really keep parents in the loop about what was going on. When I had my kindies and pre-primaries, what I found was consistency of communication meant that I didn't need to have lots of formal reports and lots of formal parent interviews. I could make sure that I had given enough information that parents felt confident about how their child was going. Think about things, 3-way conferences are where you have the parent, yourself, and the child. I've done this in middle primary and upper primary. I haven't done it as much with little people, but I've seen lots of examples and it's something that I've certainly worked with schools and setting up processes for it to work. So it can work really well, but you've got to make sure that you have a good process. There's lots of online tools that give you different ways of structuring that. Work samples, oh my goodness, I am a firm believer in keeping lots and lots of work samples. It just means that you can guide yourself through what the children are able to do now and where they've come from, and then you can help parents see the difference as well. Learning journeys and parent open nights, they can become so useful. You just need to set them up in the best way possible. Lots of schools will have different processes. Some of them are fabulous, some of them are exhausting. So just really get to know what is required when you are hearing people talk about a learning journey, because some of them are very low key and some of them are super intense. Now, diaries, you may find that some schools still use paper diaries or digital notes, or they send notes home through Seesaw and so on. So work out what will work the best in your school. And a lot of schools will say that they want all tests to go home to the parents. And I agree, all tests should go home. But in early years, think about when and why you're doing a test and what's the purpose of it. And is it going to stress the children out too much? Is it going to give you enough data to balance that out? Which of course then leads us on to NAPLAN. So our school and system data. We have school-based data that the school sets in place, and then you have system and national-based data. So NAPLAN is controlled nationally, and there's no choice. NAPLAN happens at a certain time of year for every single school, and every single school must do it. Children must be exempt under particular reasons for them not to be taking part in NAPLAN. We also have our on-entry testing that is done at the beginning of pre-primary, and that is our government system and our Catholic system definitely, and I'm pretty sure all the schools have to do it in WA, so that on-entry data is collected at the beginning of pre-primary. Now, systems have specific data that they like to collect. So, for example, from the beginning of 2024, CEWA will expect the maths assessment interview to be done for all students in Year 1, along with the observation survey, which is a form of a test for reading and literacy, and the PAT tests for some various other things as well. The Department of Ed will also have some system level assessments that they will require to be done. Now, if you want to see some examples of different data and what they do with it, the My School website goes through and it has all of the information about every single school, all of their NAPLAN information, along with a whole lot of other information, such as their school enrolments, the percentage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, the percentage of EALD kids, the income of the school, the relative income of the children who go to the school, and so on. So a huge amount of information. So before you head out on prac or before you think about applying to teach at different schools, have a look at the data that's contained about that school in the My School website. Now, holistic assessment, when we're thinking about how and why we do things, we've got this idea of moderating, we've got this idea of collecting lots of different forms of assessment and so on, but we need to make sure that we are not just looking at isolated areas. We want the assessment to be a picture of the whole child. So therefore, we need to think, how do we make sure that we are considering all of the different elements that make up a child, making sure that we are really getting all of the data together to be able to make a good assessment. So therefore, we want to make sure that our assessment is reliable in the best way possible. And we want to make sure that our assessment isn't just reflecting, a bit of a bad day or they're having a bit of a tricky time and so on. And we make sure that our records are robust and encompassing enough to really and honestly reflect a child's learning journey in the best way possible. So when we're considering holistic assessment, we don't want to just have a set of marks. We want marks, we want comments, we want observations, we want grades, we want a range of data that really provides the best range of information about the child, so that when we're talking to parents, caregivers, other people in our school or other paraprofessionals that we want to get involved, that we have all of the information that we need. So as we start to think about that, in our tutorial this week, you'll be going through a marking and a moderation task. You'll be looking at what does report writing look like. You'll be looking at your core assessment principles, some assessment scenarios, and thinking about how you can prepare for the assignment that is coming up. You have your personal philosophy that you're going to be writing. So I'm going to get you to think about what elements start to make that up, and we'll start to talk about that a little bit in your tutorial as well. So thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week, and I hope all goes well.